Is everybody ready?
Lights, camera, action.
Okay. We'll call the Willmar City Council work session to order for Monday, March 19th. First item on the agenda is public comment. Is there anybody from the public that wishes to make any comments? Seeing and hearing none, the next item on the agenda is City Hall location. Mr. Richard Ingen from Ingen and Associates. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor. Andy and I are happy to be here. We have a little PowerPoint summarizing we had three meetings with the building committee, including Mayor Kelvin, Julie Osmus representing this council, Bruce Peterson, and Sarah from the planning office. And Sean has been at some of the meetings. And yeah. Well, and obviously Ike. And we've had many phone calls. And so we've had discussions back and forth, and we're trying to present a summary of this. The ideal site, that is the first thing to look at. There's some of the big pictures to look at is what is the city? Why are we doing it? Where is it? And what is it? And this is really, we're focusing on where, the site, and it's one of the big decisions, and I think that's one that the council has got a lot of concern about getting right. Where should the city hall be located? The last meeting, or during these meetings, several sites were suggested, and we will walk through those. Each one of them, at your last council meeting, or at the last work session we had, there were several sites downtown, and the sites along Highway 12 and First Street were eliminated, leaving sites right at the vicinity of your existing city hall. We will walk through them now. What are the ideal characteristics of a city hall? Obviously, some of these are very obvious. Some of the things we have not looked at. One is price of the land. That takes a lot of more time. You need a willing seller or a process to do that. And soil conditions. These are items that also are important before you make a final decision. But what we've looked at are some of the things from the big picture. Is it could it really work as a city hall? And several of the issues are located here. Location, convenience, is it visible? You don't want it hidden, you want it public. It doesn't have to be the center of traffic in your community, but it is a public building, and public buildings normally are a civic monument to the community. And so you want a site that is not hidden and be a respectful location. And these are sort of the items that we've talked about. In the city of Willmar, right in the middle, is the existing city hall. From the last meeting, that general location, the south half of that block, was really considered as one worth considering. We identified several sites. One was to the west, where Highway 12 and Highway 40 used to separate as a Y. Coming across the bridge, it's very visible. All of these sites could work, but I think there's some differences. The second one was when you're going north of 71, coming out to this, the technology campus, there's a large green area that's not developed before you get to the campus. That's a possible site. Number 3 is the former mobile home park on the East Highway 12. Number 4 was across the street of it, right west of the Dairy Queen. And the 5th one on the Candy Mall. There's frontage lots all around the Candy Mall. Some of those have never been built on. They're a possibility. We have no data on cost on these issues, but just look at the conditions of them. The first one, I was thinking I could use a pointer here, but this is the block of the City Hall. The city owns nearly most of the southwest half of that block. The auditorium, the City Hall, and the parking lot, several pieces of land there. This is the last meeting, this was one of the sites downtown that seemed to be the most positive, and it still has a lot of possibilities. On this site, we came up with several possible locations. One would be a freestanding building right where the city hall is. Some of the advantages is it's city-owned land. You don't take any private land off the tax rolls. City offices could temporarily be located adjacent in the auditorium, which is a convenient location for a temporary office. Building is visible. It could be a freestanding building. You could make a statement. You would need to the negative one would be need to temporarily relocate City Hall. You'd have to demolish the existing building before you build. It could be linked to the city auditorium, and many of the advantages are the same there, but there's some additional ones. It's public land. There is a high interest in the community in the auditorium building. That's something I think the council has struggled with for a long time. There's maintenance that needs to be done. There's some weather issues, water issues, but it's also one of the most underused city facilities. And if we could make use of it, and one simple thing that it could relate to linking the city hall is the offices on the west. There's 2,500 feet on the third floor and on the second floor. Possibly one of those could be the IT department for the city. It doesn't have much traffic. It needs to be in a secure place. It could be there. It could also be Rack 8. The entire city offices were on those two floors of offices before the current city hall was here. But this would bring some use into that building. You could have a shared elevator. An elevator could share for what we're doing here if it was a two-story building, and it could still work there. And you could still have a building that's really an enhanced addition to that building. The third one was one discussed at the last meeting of the work session, closing Becker Avenue. The advantages, it's city-owned land. You could still use, or the existing city hall could remain in use until the new building is ready. Negatives it would disrupt traffic. Closing a public street is a public issue, and there would be discussion on that. There's also city utilities that would need to be studied. And Becker would have to be vacated if you're going to be building on it. The fourth one is try to locate the city hall inside the auditorium building. It's city-owned. There's a high interest of the city use the building and maintain it. The west side was used for city offices at a time. It certainly wouldn't meet your needs now. And the city hall could stay in the current location until that's ready. The central space is 10,000 square feet, and you could possibly put a second level in there. It's got the volume of space. Structurally, there's issues. There's uses downstairs. There's mechanical. So it's not just a piece of cake. It could be done. And so there's a possibility. And you could have everything in a two-story building in that building. Negatives, it is a lot of space. It might be even more than you really need. You would lose the gym. We'd have to coordinate activities in the basement and how this would fit together. The fifth one was discussed also at last time, and as I know the council looked at, is using the former Hardware Hank building. It's a vacant building in good structural shape. It could be linked to the city auditorium. I believe the main floor is only 8 to 10 inches lower than the auditorium main floor. And the stage on the auditorium, if I picture it right, is wood framing above the main concrete floor. So you could put a ramp between those buildings that could link together. I think probably one of the negative things for a city hall, I think a city hall needs to be more open and inviting and less of a fortress. So I think you'd want to have some windows. You'd want to do some things. These can all be done. We've done that in precast buildings before, but it's a possibility. We go on to the site. The next site is West Highway 12, where the former Highway 40 intersected. It's a very visible, accessible site, plenty of land. All of these other sites have much bigger sites of property, more square footage than you need. It is, one of the negatives could be, it could be a very desirable location for business. Your industrial park is growing, there's all kinds of activities coming. It could be a location for a very visible building, if somebody needed more of that, more of an office building for that, or really a service that would serve the traffic that goes in that area. Everybody would need to drive. There's virtually no there is a couple houses, but it's not in walking distance of hardly anybody. So it's sort of isolating the city government from, it's where the businesses are, but it's centered from where most activity is. Next site we looked at was near the entrance to the technical campus, right at the intersection. I think it's Commerce Drive and 71. We've never contacted any of the owners on these. We don't know what their plans are. It's a very visible and accessible site. It's one of the most prominent locations right on the lake and highway in the community. One of the negatives, it could be a very desirable location for private business, and especially if one of the businesses on the campus really was successful and was growing and they needed they could benefit from a more prominent location. That would be a real ideal location for them. It's not currently city-owned, and it would require just about everybody coming to City Hall to have to drive. There's very little housing inside of walking distance. We go to the third one. This is north of East Highway 12, where the mobile home park is. The site is, I believe, close to about 20 acres, way beyond what you need. Maybe a portion of it would be available. It's very visible and accessible site. One advantage here, too, it could spur commercial business development on the east side. Business development, commercial activity tends to move to the south side of Willmar. That's where most of it has happened. But the east side, this could be a bonus to the east side. Negative, it's also a close-in site with 20-some acres. So if you had a major business that wanted and needed a bigger site, this is one of the few locations. You would not find 20 acres until you moved out quite a ways of the site, right on a major thoroughfare like that. It's not currently city-owned. We go on to the next site. This would be across the street. If we look at the map, the last building that's shown would be Bolton and Mink. Dairy Queen is the rectangular site in the middle. And then it's sort of the ditch comes diagonally through a site, and that would be the site we're talking about. This high land, all those sites drop down to low land to the south. There's a ditch there. The service road from Dairy Queen could extend. There is sort of a gravel path onto the highway. It'd be possible that the service road could be gone off to the west to access the other properties there. The positives of this site, it's very visible, it's an accessible site, and it also could spur commercial development on the east side. It could stimulate other developments in that area. Negatives, it is a very desirable location for other commercial businesses, for fast food relating to the entertainment, Holiday Inn things there, for restaurants, kinds of things. That'd be one of the best locations right on the same sort of service drive as that we have a lot of things there. And it's not owned by the city. You'd be taking it off tax rolls. And the fifth one, the southeast area of the Candy Mall. Along the street the city built a few years ago, maybe it's 5 or 10 already, but it looks like it's plotted to be subdivided for commercial development. We're looking at the area right north of Aldi's. Aldi's would be the green area to the bottom. That parking lot, even on the Friday after Thanksgiving, I don't think there's a few cars, but it's never full, it's never emptied. It could be available. Positives, there's clearly ample parking in that area. It's a visible site, not as visible as some of the sites, but that is a major arterial street. Negatives, it is a very prominent location for business development for the commercial activities, and that's moving to the second tier on First Street. And it's also would be taking private property off the tax rolls. We did come to a conclusion that the site that warrants taking a harder look at is the existing City Hall site, including the auditorium and maybe the former Hardware Hank building. And, there's a number of things that are advantageous there. One is the city auditorium is 15,000 feet on one level, so there's 40,000 square feet, depending how you look at the size of the building. The city owns a large amount of space there. The city, I don't see that, there's a lot of support for maintaining the memorial room. That's a pretty sacred room for a lot of people. It would enhance the room if it's actually used by more activity right in that vicinity. There's delayed maintenance that's needed. There's some roof gutters work. I've heard some cracks. We've not done a real analysis of the building, but in general, it's a solid building. These WPA buildings were some of the best buildings built in this part of the country. Before the Depression, local government did not have money to build high-quality buildings. They did some good courthouses, but most communities were pretty frugal. And the Depression, you had, it was make-work jobs, you used labor, you had good materials, and there typically are some of the best buildings made. But it does have some work. It's underutilized, highly underutilized. A lot of it is vacant. It's not accessible. It has some issues to take care of, but I think if indeed the city is going to maintain the building, incorporating a city hall in vicinity of this building clearly would be advantageous, because if you are going to maintain the building, you have some major expenses on the building that will have to be made. Even if you set a direction to it, you wouldn't have to do everything at one moment. You could do some things and then lead the way to other uses. City government has been on the west side of that block for well over 100 years. Before the current City Hall was developed, it was in the west part of the auditorium building. Prior to the auditorium, it was in the fire station, which had been at the corner of Litchfield and 6th, where the parking lot for Christensen is. And that, even back into the 1800s, I believe, had a municipal courtroom, and City Hall was probably a small meeting room and maybe one desk or something, but those activities have been there for a long time. One of the things to look at with this site would be what are the approaches? We could look at building a freestanding building to the south, like we talked about. We could build inside the city auditorium. And, before we would want to accept something like that, I'm comfortable we can make a plan work, but the question is some of the structural issues of how we would incorporate. You'd need 2 levels to make that work. It could be, if the city hall was adjacent to it, you could locate the community center possibly in that vicinity, that building. The square footage of the main floor is not too different from, it's just a little bit larger than your current community center. It's the memorial room would be preserved. Whatever we would do here, that would be a room that would be preserved. It'd be my feeling that could be used as meetings and a conference room. You'd have to change some furniture and lighting, but I don't know that would be, it seems in my mind you're honoring the veterans more if you're using the space and people come in and out than if it's just left locked except 1 or 2 days a year. And it is size, it's a room not too different from the front conference room at your city hall that's used. I would guess there's 5 meetings a day in that room. That's just an opinion, but that would be a question and I understand there's a lot of people that have strong interest on that, but I think that would be a discussion that would need to come up. It could enhance that if we really make a use of all these activities there. The Hardware Hank building could incorporate with that, and if the community center would be going there, some of the spaces in Hardware Hank would be very good, like the shop, some of the smaller areas and activities that they do have in the community center. basically, so the recommended site or the suggested site that's being put forward will be the vicinity sort of on this plan, showing the auditorium, Hardware Hank building, and your current city hall, plus the parking lots that the city owns. How it's put together is another question. That isn't a question, that would be the next part of the discussion. Any questions?
Richard, could you go through a little bit on how we got to where we are tonight? And, you know, there's been some discussion in the community of this is moving too fast. You know, why didn't we go to the public first? And so just talk a little bit about how you'd come to us. I believe it was 2 or 3 meetings ago, and you kind of laid out the process, and you have to start someplace.
At the start of a project, there's several big questions to answer. One is why. And I think when we probably should have we should have started with that tonight also. But I think that's one. You need a consensus on the stakeholders, which include the citizens, obviously the council and staff and citizens, of why you need a council, what is the city hall, what are the functions. And for this building, I think we have a model. City government has been around for 150 years in Willmar, or very close to that. It has changed some, but it doesn't change very fast. It has a legislative session where you're in action like you have here, setting policy. It also has a series of office areas. Those can expand or grow. There'll be some changes, but it's not very likely that you're going to eliminate offices in the future. It's not very likely that the policy being made at a local level will disappear. I think most people say that's going to exist in the future, and you need a proper space for it. Where is one, and that's the one we are focusing on here. When and how. How is often fine. How much? How do you do it? It's money, and that's one. But some of the ones that come first, one is why are you doing a city hall? And I think and where, or what is it and where it is. I think the why is something you have talked about. You've had a retreat, and what we need to do in a public meeting, that would be the first thing on the agenda, is really to bring that up of why you need a city hall. Why? What are the issues we have with one? I think you're as familiar with those things as I am, but you've talked about, just reading the papers, I've heard that there's been water issues, there's some leaking, there's some issues there. One that probably the public doesn't have a good understanding is the utilization of the space. That was built as a clinic, a series of small rooms, short span structure, and I think it was renovated to a city hall, and you made a series of changes in the last, 40 years? But it was never built as a city hall to begin with. I think the question also is, should the city hall contain the council chambers? Typically, when you think of a local government, there is that legislative function of the city happens at a city hall. I think today, office space, you have people functioning in that building. It's not, I think when we've had some programming meetings, we've looked through that, and it isn't that you need more square footage, but you need more efficient square footage that can do a better job for what you need to do. You don't need a bigger building. Size is just an expense, but you need more efficient and more flexible. In planning a city hall, the one of the key words is flexibility. City government doesn't change as fast as business, but technology is changing everything around us and how you work, and there's issues with that, and you need to be able to accommodate that. And you still, where people are working, you need to let them, and people will be changing. So I wouldn't be surprised if the city doesn't make some kind of a human resource change every 6 months with job descriptions and things. That's not wouldn't be a surprise. And the facility should not hold you back for those activities.
Thank you. Council, I'm sure that a number of you have received phone calls, as I have, and emails and conversations on the street and that type of thing. And I would first ask us just to reflect on page number 4 of the presentation, which talks about the characteristics of an ideal site. And, you know, I think that one of the things that we really have to focus on is, you know, we have to identify the characteristics that we're looking at. And what we have identified as those characteristics are convenient and accessible to residents, catalyst for improvements within the city itself, accommodate city functions on a minimal number of sites, a visible location. And one of the things that we heard when we talked about the Hardware Hank building is that we wanted to remove the least amount of land from the tax rolls. And the other thing that I would add to that is that we need to be fiscally responsible in the decisions we make. And so if there's consensus on that, I think that if we use that for our discussion this evening, it will help us stay focused on where we want to go and why we want to go there. But if we don't have a basic understanding on where we're leaping from or jumping from or working off of, it makes it difficult to anchor back to something. So I would just encourage us, if the council's in agreement with that, of using that as kind of our point when we have our discussion. So Councilmember Metzke.
First, thank the building committee and for your presentation this evening. Using that page, I do have a question off that page. When you are making an assessment of these, most of these I can quantify in my head, but how did you assess being a catalyst for improvement of the city in the selection of these sites?
That's always a very difficult one, and I think every time a plan is made, there's some speculation. We did not do any major studies on that. Using as a rule of thumb, when there is a major development, there's often a spin-off. And I think that area has not had a great deal of new changes for a long time.
Right, because I know a lot of the sites that you had in here that were not selected were talked about as being really good catalysts for business expansion. So I'm wondering how you balance that in the selection piece, because it almost seems like this ends up being the only one that wasn't interfering perhaps with business expansion. So I was just curious on how much was on that particular piece. The other ones I totally understand. That one just is very difficult, I think.
I think that general area has had a depressed real estate market for a few decades, and it's in a transition. It was the regional center of retail activity for a multi-county area. If you go back 30, 40 some years, it was more of a county center, but there was, at least for the whole county, I've heard figures that the tax base from downtown was a big portion of the city tax base, and obviously that's changed significantly. You have a lot of structures that have good characteristics, but they all need an investment. Very few people have made a major investment in the buildings downtown. And roofs have been patched with Band-Aids for 50, 60 years, and all kinds of different things. And I think it could be a real asset to the community if indeed this could do something to encourage other investments nearby to stimulate the possibilities they have.
And I'll just answer it from my view, is that we did put a lot of time into it, and the reason we didn't is that we weren't sure where the council was going to go. So if we spent a lot of time on site 4, as an example, of doing an in-depth analysis, and then the council said, we don't want you to do that, then we would have put time into something that really was just spinning our wheels. So we want to get it back in front of the council. And then once you identify, if you come up with 1 site or 5 sites or whatever you come up with that you want to look at more in depth, we can do that at that point. But, you know, we wanted to bring something back to you so we could start having the conversation.
You know, maybe I can add to that a little bit. The city already is probably the major landlord in square footage on that block. And you have, you know, maintenance that you're aware of that, you know, you've had a hard time putting it in a budget because you're not really using it. The building is not working for the city the way it could to justify that investment. And I think that is one of the things that makes this very different. It's advantageous to have fewer building sites. And I think if we could consolidate here, you know, we could possibly reduce some building sites for the community, for the city.
Councilmember Plowman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the presentation tonight. Just to speak to the point of some of the calls and emails that I've gotten, why certain individuals feel that this is being rushed. I certainly don't. I think that when you have a discussion of a new, something as large as a new city office, new city hall, where the city is going to be based out of and run from, you're going to get, if you open it up too early on, you're going to get so many opinions and you're going to get so many different ideas. You're going to be bombarded. And I think you're exactly right that we gotta narrow it in, and we gotta trust, we gotta trust the experts, and we gotta put together a group which it seems like, have already begun to do some of the due diligence regarding that. Because otherwise, we could spend a lot of time engaging the community, but we would still end up with a whole lot of options. So this helps narrow the focus, I think, and get us pointed in the right trajectory. I do agree. I think the proper variables are taken into consideration regarding economic development and what can be done to spur growth in other areas of the city. I guess I feel strongly that other areas that are currently, experiencing growth, they wouldn't necessarily need additional catalysts like brand new freestanding buildings to continue that growth, which is already happening organically. And so that's why I do kind of agree with this consensus that this is one area where it could be a real plus for a client, for lack of a better term, but for the city to come in and really spark some development and some interest into new growth and new changes and new, positive things happening, because the surrounding areas then could really benefit, and that would happen in the private sector. So I don't necessarily see a plan like this as holding any other areas back. And I also think, too, there's something that can be said for, being located at the core of the city. There's a lot of historical value there. There's a lot of things that go back, decades and I guess now centuries. And I think there's a lot of value into that. And it's going to be exciting to see where this process goes. And I'm confident, and I hope that the public will be confident that, we don't take this. I don't think any single person at the table nor any of the city staff takes it lightly. I don't think it's something where we're just going to say, hey, we want to do this and this is what we want to do. I think, and I hope people can rest assured that this is something that we take very seriously, and that when it comes proper time, we will be looking for that feedback and that input from the citizens. But we got to get it started off in some direction. Otherwise, we could go. I mean, we could talk about this for years probably. But I think this is a good angle of attack. So thank you.
Councilmember Nelson, followed by Christensen.
Thank you, Mayor. The first question, the why. I mean, I understand we should be planning for a new city hall. What I'm still not sure is where's the community center fit into this concept? What is the community center? And if we are looking at combining city hall and the community center, then did we talk about the community center current location? It fits the criteria of the things that are listed in here to build both a city hall and a community center on that location. So that's still a major question for me with what is going to be inside city hall. So how do we decide what space we need until we know what's going to be inside of it? I do feel strongly that we should be looking at preserving the auditorium. It is a historic building. I have a concern because I know there is historic preservation money out there, but do we not need to know what those criteria are before we start making changes to that? Is there money available for us to preserve that building? And if we start, doing some changes, we don't have ADA, we're not ADA compliant there. I think there's some other questions with that. But I've been receiving questions from people who are saying, what is the conversation with the utilities? What's the conversation with the county? What's the court system going to do? Other community and other government entities. So I think that the concept of using land that is already owned is great. I'm just wondering how we pick a site before we know what's going to be in there. There was a comment made about community ed and rec being in there. I don't think that that's feasible if you're looking at early childhood and some of those types of things, unless we're dividing community ed and rec. There was a conversation made, I think, earlier on about the EDC and, you know, all of those kinds of things. I think we need to go through and make sure that we've crossed the T's and dotted the I's with what is going to be inside City Hall before we determine the location. And I'm supportive of working with this, but I do feel a sense of, and that's what I'm hearing is, you know, kind of what's the rush? Who's driving the bus here? Why are we doing those things? You know, where's the community engagement? And so I think strongly that we have to listen to some of those factors before we decide on a location.
We have had some meetings with the staff, and we've started doing a program of needs of really the functioning of the office portion of the city government. There are other questions. In the building, you have the Regional Development Commission is a tenant in the space, and that's a policy decision that you would have to make if it's part of the project, or what should we do with it. RAC 8 is another place. They could be in the building. None of those decisions are really made. And I think each one of these, several of the things can go parallel. I don't think you can make one and next the other. I think the first question is really, like getting ready for a public meeting, is to really prepare the why. You know, what are the reasons for doing a city hall? And then what would it be if it was built? You know, what are some of them? And I think you're correct. Each one of those there's a series of things that need study and work. But what we're trying to do is just to come together and to try to focus on, because I think the conclusion here was primarily based on you already have 15,000 square foot floor plan of an auditorium building that if that is a consensus of the community to maintain, then I think we have something. If we could use even the west offices, that's 5,000 square feet. That would be usable space that could function very well with just renovating it. It does need accessibility, but it'd be one way that the addition could be smaller here than these other sites. And if indeed it is a given, if the public wants to maintain the city auditorium, what is the use of it? How is it benefiting the community? Because to maintain a building, typically, it's hard to justify maintenance and deferred maintenance and roofing and major work if it isn't working for the community. If it's working for the community, you know, it's easier to justify it.
Councilmember Christensen.
Thank you, and thank you for being here. I share the same concerns as Councilor Nelson, and I'm wondering, did you or anybody meet with the MUC? Because at the last meeting, I believe we said somebody was going to get together with them, and maybe it was the building committee, and what direction did that go? I also think that if we're going to do a new city hall, it needs to be highly visible. It shouldn't be hidden somewhere. I would even think part of the old Elm Lane trailer park would be a great place for it, next to the EDC coming into Willmar, or the next to the Dairy Queen, as you had stated earlier. Even a lot out in the Waterview Business Park that Dunnick's has would be a great place for it. As far as taking that land out of the tax rolls, I mean, it's better that than a building that's already there, like the Hardware Hank building. I wonder if I haven't talked to anybody in the public that's bought into this yet. Let me preface my remarks by that. But I think it needs to be highly visible. And what did the meeting turn out with the MUC? What did you find out?
We've not met with the MUC.
But portions of our committee have had conversations.
So the conversation with the MUC, excuse me, the city administrator talked to the general manager over there, and he said they wanted to continue the plan they were going. What I'd like us to do tonight is to ask the MUC, Municipal Utilities Committee, to have a meeting with the council, the full Municipal Utilities Commission and the council to have a joint meeting like we did on the district heat, So have that meeting so all of us can sit down and have the conversation at the same time. So it isn't the mayor going in talking to the chair, or a member of the council going and talking to a member of the commission. So we can all sit down, we can have Mr. Engen there, and we can just talk about that, have that free flow of conversation. I'm not sure if the city administrator chooses to make a comment about that or not, but, the conversation that he had had with me is that he had that conversation with Mr. Herron, and that they had, that he had preferred to stay that direction. I know that it was on their conversation. It was brought up at their meeting as well. I did review the meeting minutes, and it's not in the meeting minutes, but it was talked about there as well. So what I would like us to do, and it's going to take us back one step, but we can still keep moving forward, is to ask, the city administrator to facilitate that joint meeting, to sit down and have that joint conversation. I think that's the prudent thing to do.
Well, I'd be happy even if just the building committee met with them, just to get a basis of them saying, we're going to go ahead with our own building. And I don't know where it's going to be, if it's going to be to the west of them or somewhere else, because I had also heard that that wasn't going to be enough room for them. But I'm concerned that we're going a direction, pushing the public in a direction, and they haven't had any input at all on this. I mean, they might have a suggestion for a site, for all we know. I tend not to see a highly visible city office building in downtown Willmar. It just doesn't. It isn't highly visible. It's kind of clustered in with the rest of the buildings downtown. And I think it was in Sartell a few weeks ago, the hockey tournament, and I believe it was Sartell, the brand new city hall coming into one of the highways off to the left. It was the city hall and police station together. All brick building, looked really, really nice. It wasn't downtown, but it was highly visible as you came in there. And I think the public, we need some more public input. Somebody out there may have a perfect spot for it. I mean, I don't know. I don't think the west end of Willmar is the best place to put it, where you head by 40 and 12. That's just. But coming in from the Minneapolis area, highly visible, nice end of town. We've got a lot of amenities there. The EDC, the conference center. It's kind of all the chamber, all right there in one spot. I think it's. I tend to think that's probably where it should go if we're going to do it and have it highly visible. But we need to get some public input here. I mean, someone might have a lot somewhere that we don't even know about. I like the Midwest Campus one too. I mean, on the corner there, boy, but that isn't visible. I mean, it's kind of a standout place. But I don't agree with the putting it in the existing location and with the auditorium. I think the auditorium needs to be kept as it is. I know that we've put a lot of money into it. I hear your suggestion it's going to take more for gutters and the roof. And however, when that building was built, they probably did it for under $100,000. And we could not build that building today for probably $5 million. That's right. The way it's built, it's like it's solid concrete, and it's a historical building that we need to maintain. And it does get used, maybe not as much as we want, but it does get used, and I believe the floor isn't that old either. It's a pretty new floor down there, and I say maintain that and put the city hall in a highly visible place.
Councilmember Schwantes, followed by Maskey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree that we need community input, but I don't think that the process we're following is excluding that community input. When we met, and for those who think that we're moving through this really quickly, I actually had to chuckle after I've read the one email a couple of times and understood the gist of it, because usually we think that government moves way too slowly for private enterprise, right? For businesses, they always want to move at a faster pace than business does, or than government does. So I was surprised by that. But we've been talking about this for how long? Think of how many meetings we've talked about wanting to have a city office building, the City Hall rebuilt. It was one of our top priorities. So I feel very comfortable that we're having this conversation. And when we had asked originally the last time you presented to us, part of that discussion was what is a process? And it had been made very clear that we need to start somewhere and we need to fine tune it down to something to give the public something to react to. And so I think that's where we're at right now, is getting to that point where we can have that conversation with the public. And I just want to make it clear to people that there's no intention of circumventing public opinion or excluding individuals from being able to present to us. I feel very strongly that this should be downtown. The downtown area is the heart of this community. And if we move the City Hall from downtown, what message does that send to people? The site that we're looking at has a great deal of room for expansion. We can do an awful lot there, including additional parking. But I think that there's room for flexibility for those conversations, whether it's a MUC, whether it's a museum. And there's a whole host of things that can be done there. And that community input's going to be very necessary to help us understand what we want to do with that space, but we have a lot of flexibility with it. And I would caution us, if we think of moving it from downtown, what message does that send to people? You know, years ago when the chamber moved from downtown, I think that took over a decade for people to get over the fact that they had moved to their site on Highway 12, right? I think of a business that moved from downtown, and the message that was sent is that this is a scary place. This is, there were misconceptions about what downtown was. And an activity like this, to create the new City Hall or redo that space in some way, shape, or form, it does bring excitement to downtown. We've got some really great things that have been happening, and I think this is a great opportunity for us to continue with that.
Councilor Maskey.
I was going to start asking questions about sites, and I'm starting to think that maybe that might not be the way to do this, because in addition to site, as we talked about, there's also functionality, there's also costs, the lack of solicitation of public input, or how to solicit that public input, how to get it from other stakeholders. It's a multifaceted piece, and we've selected to go from site first, and I'm sure that I was going to ask questions about why not this site, where how do you site selection, but that's going to happen at every facet of this piece. And so I guess I like this as a beginning, and I think we have those characteristics, and I'm not opposed to those. I think a city-owned property would be better, but everybody has an opinion on what that should be. I guess I would recommend that perhaps the building committee be expanded to an ad hoc committee to include elements of all of the project for a proposal here that would include people that think the idea may be crazy too. I'd like to see them on the committee, and people that represent functionality versus cost and so on, so we can get all the bodies in the room, let that committee work. They can meet with the MUC. They can meet with those other stakeholders. They can meet and do those types of work. And then when we have a proposal, it's a multifaceted proposal, because what I think we're going to see here is that when every one of these facets is turned, we're going to sit here and have personal disagreements on what we think is best, and we're not going to see the project go. I would totally agree with Councilmember Schwantes is that this is one of our priorities, but when you attack it with one facet, and there's so many facets, I think we're just going to sit here and spin every time we deal with another facet. So it'd be my recommendation, maybe we expand the scope of a building committee to include maybe some of these other facets. And I think we have a good start as far as site selection is concerned, but I'd like to see those other elements here. And I think once we had a proposal there, it'd be more comprehensive and an easier way to move it forward.
Councilmember Alvarado.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with Councilmember Muskie. I think that we have to put out right now that we're asking the public, we want to know what you want and where you want your city council, your city offices to be. And I think we have to allow them to voice their opinion. I like the idea of these 5 recommendations, but I just don't feel overly comfortable moving too fast forward. I think I just don't feel like we've dotted all the i's and crossed all the t's, as Council Member Nelson said. So I think we got to ask and say, hey, we want to hear, you want to hear, get a hold of your Engen and Associates and say, hey, this is what we're thinking. This is what we can bring to the table, you know, or did you think of this? Or how can we, you know, be a part of this? So I would encourage whoever's listening to approach any one of the city councilors, Engen and Associates, Mr. Peterson, Mr. Holland, whomever, and start being involved with this, because in 4 years, I could be gone, and somebody else might have to carry the ball. So let's hear what they have to say.
Councilmember Alvarado, I think that's a great idea to have the public get to us. I think it might be more constructive if we control that internally.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want people going and setting up a meeting with Mr. Engen for the cost containment piece. So contact one of the elected officials or one of the appointed officials and talk with them, because I think if, you know, Mr. Engen's not going to go and meet with 20 people and not charge us.
Right.
And
I
so
understand, but
I know he wants to make money, and I think he'd like to do that, but
okay.
I think you hear what I'm saying. I think.
But what I'm asking is that you let us know, you reach out to us, you talk to us, you give us your input. That's all I'm asking.
Yep.
And I don't want people to sit on the sidelines and not realize that we don't want their input. We want their input. We want them to be a part of this. Yes, talk to your counselors, talk to Mr. Peterson, talk to Mr. Holland. How's that?
Perfect. I like that answer better.
No, I'd like to mention, we're happy to meet with anybody, but we would plan that we'd have the mayor or Mr. Holland present or somebody. So it's really a city. We're not developing, we're working with you, getting things together and helping you. But it isn't appropriate that everybody would contact us if they're not talking with the elected officials or
Sure.
the hired people that represent the city.
Okay, I apologize.
That's really the chain of command. We want to keep a very formal chain.
Okay.
Mr. Holland knows they should be involved, be aware of everything that's happening. And we shouldn't be on a side area. We don't want to, the communications we want to make sure are perfectly clear to the elected officials or your directly hired guidance.
Councilmember Osmus.
Thank you. As far as location, the thing that I am in favor of and would like to see happen is that we utilize something with the city auditorium. That we're going to keep it. I mean, it's going to be there. So let's do something with it that benefits the city. So I'm leaning towards, or I like the idea of either incorporating part of the city offices with it, partially or totally, as far as taking off part of the gymnasium, making it into 2 levels so that we're still preserving the memorial room. If we attached, and when you talk about so many facets and things involved, that's why I think this discussion has to take place first. It had to start someplace. So start here with location, and then we can talk with the public for the public input as far as where they would like to see things and what could they see incorporated into it. And I think then that plays into, is there a use then for the Hardware Hank building? And then just a smaller part of the city offices, because more could go into the auditorium. But I just really like the idea of doing more with the auditorium. We are just not utilizing that huge space. And so the downtown area to me makes more sense. It's already city-owned. We already know we're going to have to do maintenance on that building with the crack in the east wall, with the repair of the bricks. So if we could do an improvement in it with the city office building and whatever else we might be able to do with it, that makes sense to me. Otherwise, we're fixing it up for what? But
Councilmember Nelson.
Thank you. I'd like Councilmember Meske to expand, I think, on his concept of adding some people on with the ad hoc and how we would incorporate the community. I do think what we're going to do in the building is critical to where it might be. I also have a concern about the auditorium, that before we start remodeling it or making suggestions to it, can we check out, is there historic preservation dollars that we could be utilizing that to maintain that? And does that mean that then we can't do a second floor and we should leave it as is, and those types of things? I really think we should be checking that out before we come up with a plan to make changes to it. And I'm supportive of having a meeting with utilities, however we do that. But I also think that we need to be reaching out to the other government entities, the county, the school, the court system, anything else where there is property that might provide a good location when we come up with what we're going to do, before we just make that decision.
Mr. Mayor, I could address that. We've done a number of projects with legacy grants through the Historical Society. You can get up to 200,000 is sort of that maximum amount. But they will be involved, and the things that work easiest would be accessibility. They know you have to have that in mechanical systems. But the one thing that would be controversial if we tried to put how we subdivide that larger space. We've had experience trying to convert historic movie theaters into multi-theater ones, and they want one grand space, and the business plan wants 4 small ones. So you can show, so there is a challenge to do it, and they will have issues. But I think their issues come with the money. If you can also get tax, there's a federal tax credit or a state tax credit of 20% for each of them, up to 40% that you can use. But you still have to have meet all their guidelines. And that wouldn't be, you couldn't use that money for an addition. It'd have to be in that building. I don't expect we would be able to put a 2-story city hall in there maybe, but that's a controversial issue. If we were renovating it for a large gathering space, I think would be no problem. But the question is, when that was built originally, that was the place for basketball games. It was a place for shows, conventions, boxing matches. It had everything. The Armory was built a little bit later, and they took some of them. We built many, many schools that have taken those activities. You built the Civic Center. That has it. So the original program of the building has sort of drifted off and expanded in the rest of the community. So it's hard to justify how you use that. And if we could use it, it's a natural gym. If it could be used for community education or something, I think then we could put together an historical grant would have reasonable ability to succeed.
I think that would maintain a city presence in downtown by enhancing that building, whether the city hall was attached to it or not. With that, I do think, that's a journey that we have to look at. But I do want to hear from Councilmember Meske on how his concepts with that. But I also am requesting that somehow we contact the other government entities.
Well, I can certainly address, I see site and function, or location and function and cost as intertwined, multifaceted pieces. If we say we're going into the city auditorium and we don't know what we're going to put into the auditorium, the cost of that ranges drastically. If we're not going to be using it as a community center, what you're going to do is a different cost set than if you decided, we're going to put a community center in there as well. Then what activities is a community center going to have? We don't know, because we haven't consulted folks about what that is. Mr. Enkin's going to be able to make whatever design once you know what is going to be the functionality of it and the cost. That's what he does. He'll make that work. But right now, all we're doing is making the site dictate the function and dictate whatever cost it is to make the function happen. And I think that is very tunnel focused, and it is not giving us the big picture of the total utilization of what we're planning to do. That's why I say I think you need to have those 3 pieces addressed at the same time. That's why I was suggesting that we expand the building committee to include functionality and start talking about costs so we can actually figure out exactly what we are intending to put into a building. So who would have to be part of that? People that are I think we have site experts who have located sites, and we have a way to talk about this, but as you start looking, I want some function folks in there to start saying, here's the intent of what we may use this for, and maybe some of these other locations then drop off, and maybe new ones come on board, but we have no idea. Instead, it feels like we're trying to force that, square peg in the round hole concept because we know the site. Well, you need, to me, have all of those pieces. So I guess what I'm saying is expand this building committee to include and call it the City Auditorium / Community Center Committee, and let's start talking about the whole picture is what I was alluding to. Now, and that may be the right, not the total answer either, and I'm absolutely open to suggestions of how that makes it function better, but right now it feels like we're saying the site, we're letting everything else dictate, and it seems strange to me that we're not including all the other pieces.
Mr. Mayor, can I make
Hold on a minute. We could have brought you all that. We've had some of these discussions, but we knew if we did that, we'd get assassinated. Because we'd have been told, what are you so far down the road for you? Why didn't you bring this back to us sooner? And so I can tell you some of those conversations have happened, but we're going by the history of this council of when you bring too much information, the people that bring the information aren't well received by this table. And so we have had some of those conversations. We've had some of those things happen. And we can certainly do that. We're not opposed to doing that. But at the same point, if we had brought to you tonight and said, we want to put City Hall, the municipal utilities, and the community center together, I mean, I'd be grabbing most of you by the ankles as you're going through the roof. So we need to bring something to you to have the conversation, and this is exactly what we were hoping that would happen. And so I think the process is moving exactly like we'd hoped it would move, or as I had hoped it would move. We have some other players we have to bring to the table. And, again, this is, and I'll go back to when we did the local option sales tax. And, well, Mr. Mayor, why are you bringing it to us this way? And then when we talked about the Civic Center, why did you bring it to us this way? And because we had walked farther down the path before we came to, to the table. So we're bringing it to the table early so that we can have the conversation. And we need to have the public input. We've identified that. We've said that all along. We need the public input. But if we're not at a point where we're ready to make a site and say, hey, we kind of want you to start focusing here, if we'd have went out and applied for historical grants to see if we could get historical funding for the auditorium, you'd have said, what did you do that without talking to us for? So, I mean, it's not that we haven't had these conversations. It's just that when you bring this to the council, and, so I certainly hope that you think that the committee that you put together is smart enough to understand that. If you didn't, you got the wrong people on the committee. So.
I'd like to address your comments. Before you approve a project, the key issue, there needs to be a consensus on the council and really in the basic community on three major things. What are we doing? Where is it? And what is the cost? There's no question about it. You can't start with the cost. If you do the cost estimate right away, and every little change changes the cost. A normal process is we get a good handle of what we're trying to do. And we would show that one would be a program of needs, and we would be, like our next time we talk about that, where we list the offices. The input on that largely comes from the staff, but also as elected officials, how city government operates. Could you share things? Could you sub out? Those kind of big picture discussions. But staff have the best picture on the day-to-day operations of what happens in city government. The other part of that is the council. What is the venue for a good council meeting? And you all had a lot more experience with that. But the public, I think the things that the public would be most interested in, one will be, where is it? Obviously, the cost. Everybody wants to know what the cost. But at the start of a project, you can't start with the cost, because you start with the cost, then you make other decisions, and then all of a sudden you got to, because when we start with a cost, it's a cost estimate for whatever we have at that moment. and every change we make has to adjust the cost up or down. Because it isn't a static thing until you have everything, all the decisions made. And so I think the approach, the one piece here was the site, a discussion on it. And I think this is one of the pieces the public is going to know. And if we talk about a cost, it has to be just a hypothetical cost. I think when we've started a program of needs, discussing it, and this is something we could present to you, but the input of that, numbers of employees and things, we need to plan for, so it meets good today, but more importantly, it's flexible so you can accommodate the changes you're going to make every next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And that's what I think the council can visualize. You have to be able to, you can see that there's some flexible change, but it isn't a concrete thing. And the public wouldn't have most of the public, unfortunately, a good thing would be to tell how the city government works, the day-to-day operation, what happens in City Hall. I think that could be a very good story for a public meeting. And the one thing everybody understands will be price, and you don't like the price until you know what you're doing, why you're doing it.
Councilmember Maskey.
That's exactly what I would agree with, everything you just said. And so if you had a group going together and they're hearing from the public that, oh, it looks like people want to have a gymnasium included in their center, the committee could right away go, do you understand this is the cost associated with doing that? It would be nice to have that all happen when you have that input to be able to make that proposal the way it should be made. And I would also say that this council, I don't think, has been inconsistent truly, because if I recall, local option sales tax, we came with a cost first of what we want to do, and we didn't have the project tied to it. Here, and I am in no way, shape, or form criticizing the building committee and saying they're not capable of this. I'm just saying this is an opportunity to bring in other people into that fray to make sure we have more bases covered, because I will tell you, I feel like I have been consistent in these decisions that if I saw a proposal come forward with a committee that had people from different facets of the community, even somebody who thinks perhaps the whole project should never happen in the first place, and you find that I got consensus coming out of that group forward with a proposal, I'd be more apt to say, absolutely, you have done due diligence and got all the stakeholders involved. That's all I'm suggesting. I'm not in any way, shape, or form criticizing the work of the building committee. Like I said, this is a good start, and it should be perceived that way. But I just feel with that function piece and cost piece, and you can keep that cost within the committee until you actually have a proposal. I understand that. But they are all connected. And it seems disconnected when you pull out one piece and say, we're going to be at this site no matter what, without knowing necessarily what functions you're going to do in that space. That is all I'm saying.
Okay, I think where we're at on this is, I think it was a good discussion. What I'm hearing is that we need to, I would really like to get consensus from the council that we get together with municipal utilities and have one meeting, just to get everybody in the same room and just to see if there are synergies there. Some of the things that I look at with that is they need a council commission meeting space. They need bathrooms. They need meeting spaces. They have functionality as far as hallways, those types of things. So I think if we all get together and we have that conversation, I think at that point, then we can start even being stronger when we go to our public meeting. And, I know our next thing on the agenda is the public meeting and when we're going to have that. But I think that that's something that we really could build some consensus if we did. So Councilmember Maskey.
I'll just say as the MUC liaison, I can tell you that they did the same kind of thing with what they need for function, where they would like to go, and they have ideas of where they go. So I think a meeting would be very healthy there, but realize we'll see if there's some synergies, but that we may discover that there isn't, but it's a conversation we should have for sure, because they've had similar conversations and I raised similar concerns there at that. And I think they did more of a comprehensive piece, and they've been at it a lot longer than we have. So I would think that's a very good idea.
Okay, Councilmember Nelson.
Thank you. I just wonder if there aren't some examples out there too. I know that Austin just built a new facility that houses both utilities and City Hall, I believe. And maybe there's some pros and cons to learn from some of the other communities that are doing things. If there are other examples in different communities, I know Fergus Falls just finished their project. That was historic preservation. I mean, some of that was historic preservation, but are there other examples of other communities that have gone down this road that might be helpful for us or even for community members to understand, and whether it's working or not working? So it feels like we've got some more homework to do and information to bring forward. So
There certainly are many good examples, and I know Mr. Holland has talked about that, and the mayor's talked about making a trip to look at some and document some.
Okay, is there anybody opposed to the joint meeting with municipal utilities and the council? Okay, so Mr. Holland, can you try to get that set up, hopefully within the next 30 days? Preferably within the next week and a half, but with schedules, and we know that not everybody may be able to attend. But we just need to, when's their next meeting? Next Monday?
No. Yeah. I'll have an answer. I think
Well,
it's next Monday. Yep.
Yeah, okay, so, if we say we try to have a meeting within the next 2 to 3 weeks,
I'll try to get something to him this week, and then if they're meeting on Monday, then they can probably give us, confirmation that that's a good date in April.
yeah, so just get a couple dates that we can see.
Right.
We can mess schedules. And would an evening meeting be better than a daytime meeting for most? I know schedules are busy and crazy, but, so let's try to do an evening meeting.
A 5 o'clock,
Let's shoot for 6.
6, okay?
That work for you, Ron, Councilman Christensen? Is that better than a day meeting?
It makes no matter, I'm available.
The commission, the utilities meets at 11:45 during days. I don't know if they're adjusted to that schedule or not too, so make sure it works for all of the parties that'll be there. That's all I can tell you, and it is next Monday. Yeah.
Right. And so I think what we're going to have to do is, we're probably not going to get all of their commission members and all of the council. So I think we're going to have to just, the two administrators will have to pick a date and a time, and then we'll just make it happen. Okay, Mr. Holland?
Will do.
Okay. Thank you for that good discussion. Next is the public meeting schedule discussion. Councilmember Nelson, you had asked this to be brought to the table. Mr. Holland, did you want to introduce this?
I want to start with a couple of announcements, and hopefully everyone has it on their calendar. Why is my speaker so good? I sound like I'm in the sports stadium, ready for the Jayhawks. Anyway.
Are they one of the number ones that didn't get beat yet?
Not yet. If everyone could put on their calendar March 27th at 5 o'clock at the fire station. That's the next meeting on the Civic Center Master Plan.
At what time?
5 o'clock to 7. And that's on March 27th. That's a Tuesday. And then also on April 3rd, again at the Fire Hall Conference Room, we will have the Robbins Island Master Plan, and that is from 5 to 7.
what was the date?
April 3rd, Tuesday. And then we had, or I should say I had, scheduled the City Hall open hearing meeting or town hall meeting for April 11th. But after tonight's meeting, there were several questions about getting more information out and how many steps do we get. Tonight, for me, I was looking for some consensus or some type of guidance as far as the site. And then I was looking for April, where we would present some of the questions that Councilmember Meskey was asking about. What's Site A going to cost? What's an estimate there? What's the infrastructure? Do you have to build a street? how far to the sewer and all that type of things. Some of those questions can be answered, and at least some fairly good estimates. And so that's what I was looking for, that we would come back with another meeting in April, and then we would say, here's 3 sites. Here's 2 examples downtown. Here's one out on Highway 12. Here's a cost estimate for building inside the auditorium. Here's a cost estimate for building outside. Here's a cost estimate for Highway 12. And then we would gather input from the stakeholders and from the general public and let them look at those 3 choices. And then you can do everything from have a survey there on site to even having a Survey Monkey, something online, and get data from that. And then that would, I think, give us some more guidance to come back to the council and say, here's some further recommendations. That's kind of where I was looking for some of those, answer some of those questions. I've been talking with several people here in the community, from the chamber to some of our public policy meetings to the Rotary, that we are going to have community input, and that we were just waiting to get some recommendations, some alternatives for people to choose from. And so that's what I've been announcing. But Mayor, right now we have April 11th scheduled, and I know that there's a conflict with some members of the council. There's a guest speaker coming in that night. But do we still want to schedule a meeting? I guess maybe we should get a consensus from the council. Do we want to go ahead and do that next step as I was just discussing?
Councilmember Nelson.
Maybe it would be helpful to get our meeting scheduled with the utilities first, and we can come back with when do we want to do this public meeting at our next council meeting.
Okay, so let's get the meeting scheduled with the municipal utilities, and after we have that joint meeting, the following meeting, we'll come back and discuss the public meeting date. So we're minimally looking out probably a month or more before that would happen. So a month to 2 months, month and a half. So, okay. So that's what we'll do, and we'll take that the next step. Obviously, we have the full council there. If we have the full commission there, that will be a public meeting that people can attend. So if people want to attend and provide input at that, they certainly can. And I believe that Mr. Engen, well, I'll let Mr. Holland work with you on that, but on who we want there and how we want that discussion to go. So I'm almost thinking we're going to have, I mean, is the council okay if we put an agenda together, or do you want input on the agenda that gets put together for that meeting with the utilities?
I think it's just important that we're able to dialogue with them about what their plans are. And, you know, if there's a reason that we should be talking together, or if there's a reason we shouldn't be talking together. So I'm not sure about the agenda.
I think it would be just a good idea, because I've seen drawings both ways. If we sort of exchange some schematics and some ideas, so before the meeting, so we don't have to have presentations from each body about what they're at. We can look at those things, so we can get right to having a conversation. I think would be helpful, because I know they've got schematics and all that kinds of things, and we have similar stuff.
Sure.
But I'd be comfortable if they put in the agenda, as long as I don't want to hear a half-hour presentation about each project in it, because we don't need that. We can just look at those and get right down to seeing if there's some dovetailing we can do.
Okay. Everybody else good with that? You good with that? You understand what we're asking for?
Yes, I'll try to get as much information as we can and provide that to the council before we have the meeting.
Okay, because I know they have a lot of information. I mean, they've got, you know, I've seen a lot of their information, so they've got a lot of good stuff, so. Okay, sounds like a plan. We have direction. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you for your presentation. Next, Mr. Christensen, a presentation on a cooperative agreement for 7th Street crossing.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. And I don't know if this has got,
I think that was just their information that they brought.
yeah, I don't see the agenda up here. In front of you is the, I realized late this afternoon that that is the entire cooperative agreement between the county and BNSF. My intent was only to provide the first couple pages so that we knew a dollar amount and then have the discussion. What this does is it's likely the first time most of you have seen this type of, or this document itself. What we're doing in a nutshell is to repair or resurface the 7th Street crossing across the railroad tracks. And the county and BNSF have already started these conversations. And so the agreement you see in front of you won't be to you at all. That is between the county, who is the road authority, because it's officially County Road 41, and the BNSF. What you will see as we move forward with this, and what I'm proposing is an agreement between the county and the city for half of what this agreement indicates, that 100,000. And so that's what this CAR form intended to portray, is that we would be, for lack of a better term, on the hook for or responsible for up to $50,000 for the repair of and resurface of that crossing.
Okay. Council, any questions? Councilmember Nelson.
Just a question on the time frame. I know there's a lot of complaints about how bad it is. So is that something that, is that this summer or?
Yes, I've been told, Councilmember Nelson, I've been told that the concrete planks are actually in the railroad yard now, and so could go at any time. And so as soon as these agreements get in place and signed and back and forth, that they need about a week to repair it, and then we can get in and do the surfacing. So my guess is it'd be shortly or soon after the road restrictions go off as possible. Get some batch plants fired up and get some hot mix in there and be done with it.
Okay, and this isn't new. This is just what happens, correct? That we have to participate in this
Sorry. say that again?
financially? This isn't new that we have to participate in this financially.
It's not new as far as the agreements go. It's new in the fact that we did not budget for it. So Finance Director Okins and I will work on figuring out where to pay for it. But as far as who pays for what on this crossing, no, it's not new.
It's not new. Okay,
Correct.
thank you.
Last time it was surfaced, the county and city split that as well.
Councilmember Maskey.
I would consider this an emergency. I hear it from a lot of people. They're going to start losing tires over that. So is this something that we can move to the council tonight? Because it truly is a hazard. And if we did that, moved it to the council and approved this dollars, Sean, how fast could we have the installation in there?
Well, again, until the road restrictions are off, we can't do anything. We can't move the pieces in place, or a lot of them. And then we would have to, until we get the asphalt plants fired up, we won't get a final surface in there, right? So we're looking at May, probably, but we could probably, I mean, I don't know, I'd have to talk to Mel and see how fast it's going with Burlington Northern. This agreement that you see, this physical agreement has to go in front of the county commissioners as well. And so there's a few moving parts here to move, but when they said they need about a week to do it, I think we can get in and get out and do that fairly quickly.
Does BNSF pay for all of the damage to vehicles that?
I think that would be on the category of good luck.
Yeah.
Councilmember Fagerly.
Okay, Mr. Mayor. Since we're talking about the railroad, anything on quiet zones on?
I thought you might bring that up tonight when we're talking about this crossing. Again, this 7th and 10th Street crossings, because of the distance between the tracks, the number of tracks, and the short distance between the tracks and the highway and other intersections, it's very unlikely and almost impossible to get, probably is impossible to get a quiet zone in there as we're used to seeing.
Then I thought they had changed their rules or something about horn blowing. I think Councilperson Plowman said something a year ago or a couple years ago.
It's going fast.
Never heard.
Yeah, what I understand is that they didn't change the rules, but there is a small rule in there that says that you can apply for a conditional or
Waiver.
pseudo quiet zone or,
It's a waiver.
yeah, but you still have to build the tracks and the separation and the crossing arms the same, whether the horn's not blowing at all or just at night, I mean, during the day.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that what Councilmember Fagerly is saying, because, you know, we have a citizen, Mike O'Brien, who has contacted the railroad, and the railroad, and I've got the emails, which I shared with the council, which doesn't say what you just said.
Okay?
And so, and I know I supplied those to staff. And so we need to get back with the railroad and just find out what the truth is. Because if they told Mr. O'Brien one thing and they're telling us something else,
Well,
that's a problem.
And what I'm telling you is what I read from the FRA rules and regs directly.
Yeah. And I did have a conversation with the public relations lady. What's her name again? She's been on quite a bit of time. Yeah.
Amy something.
Yeah. And the email that she sent me is, yeah, we should be able to make this work. So, you know, let's circle back with her and close that gap and just make sure that we have an email from her saying, no, you can't do that in Willmar.
You realize it's not going to come from her.
Exactly, I understand that, right. It comes from engineering.
Right.
Exactly, yeah. So, okay, so, because I had that phone call, I imagine you got called this weekend again. My phone was ringing off the hook, I think it was Saturday night, that the horns were crazy again on Saturday night, so, okay. Councilmember Nelson.
Someone had made a suggestion, is there a way to close 10th Street overnight? It would be half the horns, you know, and just have a time frame that you have to go to 7th Street, not 10th Street, that it would cut down on half of it. Is there something that we can propose to do that without specific a quiet zone, but just shut it down overnight?
See, I don't know if a road closed means anything to the engineers on the train. Because if they cross, my understanding is any rules, is as long as they cross a public crossing, the horns have to blow. And just because it's closed, it doesn't mean it's not a public crossing. Now, I don't know that for a fact, but that's, everything I've talked to, that's the only time they can get away without blowing the horns is on a private crossing.
Just trying.
I understand.
Half the whistles would be
I
half the
understand.
whistles.
Trains have been here a long time, and the horns have been blowing every time they cross the crossing.
Okay, sounds like a plan. I'm not sure how fast you can talk, Mr. Okens, but if you could put the emphasis of your conversation on the capital piece for tonight.
Mr. Mayor, I do understand the urgency and the time restraints, so I will do my best to make it speedy. What you'll notice, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, is a little bit different format. Mr. Holland and I have worked on that a little bit and changed it, so you'll see that format. This report, again, since it's through the end of February, there's not a lot of expenditures on it. So on the vehicles, you'll see there we've purchased 3 out of 13 vehicles. The K-9 unit, that's equipment that's been purchased to date, but the actual vehicle hasn't. I've had conversations with the police chief, and that will be worked out with the other 4 vehicles as well as far as the budgetary items. So with that, the second page in your handout is the other capital projects that you see there, City Hall and the items that have been approved. A couple different expenditures that we've had to date, the sound system at the Civic Center and the refrigeration system. We continue to work with that, and we'll be talking about the financing at the council meeting tonight. The third page is the capital improvements that we are presently started and working on. We will be reconciling that and be coming back to you next month with our final report for 2017, along with the operating costs and final numbers as they relate to that. If there are projects that have been initially forward from previous years, we will have recommendations to incorporate those into future budgets. So with that, that's the capital. The operating, you'll see a little different format there. The first column is the actual for 17 for the total year. We do have year-to-date for 18 and the percentage budget. If you're looking at a percentage budget, 16.7% would be where we should be at if we have 2/12 of the, and this speaks to our cash flow problem, which we've talked about in previous meetings, where we are only at 2.7% collected. We're well aware that the property taxes and the state aids. We've also kind of put it into categories of general government. These are general operating. Again, we should be at 16.7%. And again, since we're only 2 months into the year, you'll see that those percentages are rather low. The assessing is an agreement with Candy White County. You've discussed that at a previous meeting as well. The next page is your public safety and streets and highways. The non-departmental public safety is a safety program that we do with Safe Assure. That's, I believe, two times a year that we do that. So that's why that percentage is higher than where it maybe should be. It's a timing issue. The next page is your recreational and cultural. Again, the non-departmental cultural and recreation includes our civic organizations when they make their request. Meals on Wheels has requested their full allotment and has been given to them, so that accounts for that large percentage as well. The waste treatment page, you'll see there that we work with the municipal utilities, and they have usually 45 days to get us the collections for the waste treatment plant, and so you see no collections, but those came in shortly after the end of February for January. So again, there's kind of a cash flow item there as well. The investment page, which is your last page, you'll see we took and changed that format. Instead of the actual investments and their maturities and everything, which was kind of busy, we went with the amounts that are invested in the institutions. You'll see there that they're pretty evenly spread out. The item I'd like to point out here is the Heritage Bank, and we've talked about that as well. At the end of the year, there was $10.4 million. Most of that was used in bond payments due February 1st. We're at 4.8. That has to last us through, basically through June. With that, Mr. Mayor, hopefully I wasn't too quick, but I answer any questions you may have.
Mr. Holland.
I just wanted to say that we've been discussing this new format for a couple of months, and hopefully this has been helpful. And then also, next month, expect to get a hard copy of an Excel spreadsheet with these capital projects so that you can keep that handy month to month, and you can see how that changes. I know that the comments have been made that sometimes we don't spend all the amount in one column, and then it gets moved to another column where we don't know how that happened. And so by having that Excel spreadsheet once a month, you can track right along with us, and we will post this on the website as well so that everyone is aware that how we're spending the capital money, and if we move it to playgrounds or something else, then everyone can clearly see how that happened. I just wanted to point that out, so thank you.
Thank you. Any, Council, have any questions for either Mr. Oaklands or Mr. Holland? Thank you for the report. It's helpful this way. Sean, I looked at your report. It has a lot to do with snow emergencies, and I think we've got those pretty much underhand. So do you want to go ahead and do a quick update, or do you want us to forgo your update?
Mayor, I've included the slides that I was going to give you as an update anyway, and it was a lot of snow removal equipment and piles and things that we hadn't seen most of the year until last month. So I'll stand for any questions if you have them.
Okay. The one thing that I really appreciated was the barrels that you put in downtown, where you had the notice that, you know, we're under a snow emergency. I think that might be something new. I don't recall seeing that before.
That was new this time, and I am happy to report that with that, there was 0 cars towed this last snow emergency. So
sure. And I seen how they were, or I saw how they were put up downtown, and they were very, I mean, very. You had to hit them,
right,
I mean, they were right in the middle of the road, so good job by you and your staff and the police department for the staff that they did.
Pass that along.
Councilmember Nelson.
Just a question, I've gotten some concerns about sidewalks. And just wondering what sidewalks the city does and what sidewalks we do. I'm not asking for that information now, but as we look to next year.
Sure.
With what are we responsible for and what aren't we? And also just a question about the safe routes to school, you know, what we do for sidewalks on some of those designations where school routes are.
Right. And that question I don't know for you. The first question I can answer, in general, the property owner is responsible for the sidewalk, and that goes for everybody. That being said, the city public works staff does a lot of the cleaning on the central business district.
Okay. So if we were to talk about sidewalks, Willmar Avenue, 19th Avenue, are there sidewalks, I guess I'm questioning, are there sidewalks that we should be doing?
As the city, you're asking?
Yes.
My short answer would be no, that I think it should stay the way it is now, the property owner is responsible. But if you want it for a discussion item, we can sure have the right staff here and discuss it.
I has some concerns out in the neighborhood where the new school is, kind of with that, with more building going on out that direction. And I've received concerns about the school sidewalks are done, the city ones aren't. They're done in the afternoon, not in the morning, and I get that. But I guess I just wondered if, on the emphasis with the safe routes to schools, if there's something else we should be doing. I'll quit.
Okay. Mr. Holland, can you put that on an agenda for the next work session?
Can do that.
Or within the next year?
Before next.
Mr. Holland?
Before
within the next
winter.
year? Before next winter?
Next winter.
Yes.
Judy,
Councilmember.
got that?
Councilmember Rasmus.
While we're talking about work sessions, I don't know if this is too far out here, but we do have a fifth Monday in April. And so I'm just wondering if we should start to be looking at that on the calendar, but just thinking about the whole city office building thing, that might be pretty timely for us to have a good discussion about some of that issue.
Sure. So let's plan that, and then, again, we should have, if there's any finance issues or any labor issues, they should come to that meeting as well.
On the fifth Monday.
The fifth Monday in April.
I hope to have some of the labor issues maybe at the second meeting in April, but.
That's fine.
But if it doesn't, we can move it to that would be the 30th. So if everyone wanted to put the 30th of April, 5 o'clock?
I think we were doing those special ones at 5. Does that work for everybody? 5 o'clock, yes.
Anything else for me?
Thank you. We'll stand adjourned until 7 o'clock.
We figure it out. Okay.